and welcome to the Spotlight. Today we are going to be spotlighting the MLB and the current coronavirus crisis going on. So to start off, I have a quick video courtesy of ESPN. It's roughly 6 minutes. Wanted to play it just to get a baseline and then continue the discussion from there.
There has been a COVID-19 outbreak among the Miami Marlins. It is a crisis obviously unwelcome, not totally unanticipated in today's world. Now, we know that 2 baseball games have been postponed this evening in Philadelphia, in Miami. What can you tell us about the Major League Baseball schedule going forward beyond tonight?
Well, our first concern, obviously, is the health of the players and their families and making sure that we do everything possible to minimize the spread of the virus among our employees. We've been fortunate so far. We've done tens of thousands of tests. Our positive rate has been 0.4%, so we feel like the protocols have worked pretty well. Notwithstanding that fact, we have made some decisions. The Miami Marlins will not play their 2 games in Miami tonight and tomorrow. We're doing some additional testing. If the testing results are acceptable, the Marlins will resume play in Baltimore on Wednesday against the Orioles.
Would those 2 games in Miami be rescheduled for Baltimore?
Again, we're waiting to see exactly what we get in terms of test results before we make a decision. Right now, the only thing that's firm is that if the test results result in negatives for the rest of the team, we would play at least 2 in Baltimore on Wednesday and Thursday.
You, every Monday, have a weekly call with Major League owners.
Right.
Today, was there discussion, questions about the possibility of this season being, if not canceled, put on hiatus?
No, there really wasn't. We talked about the situation. I think most of the owners realize that we built protocols anticipating that we would have positive tests at some point during the season, that the protocols were built in order to allow us to continue to play through those positives. And I think there was support for the notion that we believe that the protocols are adequate to keep our players safe.
The protocols you talk about, walk me through that, because from what I understand, Marlins players were tested Friday, results come back the next day. Sunday, there's a decision apparently made among the Marlins whether they're going to play that day or not. Does all that line up with what happened this weekend in Philadelphia? Well,
I think really what happened was there was testing on Friday, 1 positive on Saturday, testing again on Saturday, and the 3 additional positives on Sunday. What then happened under the protocols was we did contact tracing on all 4 positives. There was, I think, a small number of players who met the CDC guidelines. They were quarantined. We ordered additional testing. We did symptom checks. We did temperature checks and decided to proceed with the game on Sunday.
So just to be clear, the CDC guidelines are about close contact.
That's correct.
In other words, just being a teammate of a player does not put you at risk.
That's correct. There's a distance requirement as well as a duration requirement.
Contact tracing. From what I understand, each team does have people available to do contact tracing. With the Marlins, have you learned anything about the origin or the scope of the outbreak based on contact tracing so far?
Right. Each team does have at least 1 individual who was trained to do contact tracing, and they're supervised by an individual in the commissioner's office. We have some theories as to what might have happened, nothing definitive at this point.
What did you learn from the testing during summer camp before we got to the point of teams beginning to travel to play regular season games?
Well, it's been really a constant process for us. We have improved the testing. There was a timeliness issue early on. We've completely eliminated the problem of having pending tests that people were talking about. But that applies across the board in terms of the protocol. It is an evolving situation. We continue to look at them. We're looking at them again today to see whether there's anything that we've learned from this situation that might cause us to make alterations.
It's been said that one team with an outbreak such as this is baseball's worst nightmare. Is that the way you look at this situation?
I don't put this in the nightmare category. I mean, obviously, we don't want any player to get exposed. It's not a positive thing, but I don't see it as a nightmare. We built the protocols to allow us to continue to play. That's why we have the expanded rosters. That's why we have the pool of additional players. And we think we can keep people safe and continue to play.
Is there a point, a critical mass, so to speak, within the league or within a team that would cause you to shut down part of the schedule, all of the schedule?
There is certainly both. There's certainly both. I mean, I think that a team losing a number of players that rendered it completely non-competitive would be an issue that we would have to address and have to think about making a change, whether that was shutting down a part of the season, the whole season. That depends on the circumstances. Same thing with respect to league-wide. You know, you get to a certain point league-wide where it does become a health threat, and we certainly would shut down at that point.
All right, so you saw Rob Manfred, the MLB commissioner, speaking on ESPN there. So I have just a few thoughts on this. So shout out in the comments if I ask a question you know the answer to or you want to participate. Because my first thought when seeing this interview was, where's the money in this? Why are we even playing sports at all? You would think, at least my initial thought is, okay, so we have vendors, we have folks selling food and wares at the stadium, folks that have been out of work. You want them to be able to go back to work. That's fine. Of course, everybody wants a paycheck. But when you're playing to an empty stadium, where is the money in that? Who's getting money? Is it the players getting money? Are they looking for their salaries? Is it folks like Rob Manfred who will be profiting from this season going on? So I'm sure it's way more multifaceted than that. It's not just the folks that are physically in the stadium that will be profiting from the sport being played. But when you're faced with a major pandemic, at what point do you say, maybe we don't play this year? Do the players really need that salary? Who else stands to profit from this? And then how many coronavirus cases are too many coronavirus cases for them to say we're not going to be playing this game anymore? And we see that there are leagues that have been able to successfully manage the coronavirus, like you see in basketball, where they have what they refer to as the bubble, and they're able to proceed with their season. Granted, they were a little further into their season than MLB is, but when MLB is quoting, he says, they had tens of thousands of tests with a positive rate of 0.4%. Now, that's only assuming tens of thousands means 20,000 at minimum. That's 80 people in 20,000. You know, in the grand scheme of things, it's really not a lot of people, but how many people that get coronavirus are too many people? Because when they say they've done tens of thousands of tests, 80 people is just 80 people that work for this organization. That's not including the people that they go home to, and then those people that they interact with then. And that's why we have the pandemic. That's how it spreads. It goes on and on and on like this. So at what point do you say 80 people is too many? 100 people is too many? Why are we playing this sport at all right now? Who stands to profit from this? So he says, the interviewer asks, or states that they have a weekly call with MLB owners. Rob Manfred states, and they had questions about the season being canceled or put on hiatus post Marlins outbreak, because the Marlins did have a major coronavirus outbreak. So basically he's asking, were there concerns or were there questions or were folks stating they might want to cancel or postpone this season? And Manfred responds, responds, "No, there really wasn't. I think most of the owners realize we built protocols anticipating we would have positive tests. We believe that the protocols are adequate to keep players safe." So if you're anticipating that there will be positive tests before the season even starts, again, how many are too many? And protocols are adequate to keep players safe. How many games are we into the season? And the Marlins have already taken a major hit in terms of the number of players that have coronavirus. And what was really interesting is the timeline. He says that there was 1 positive test on Friday, 3 positive tests on Saturday. And despite that, they go on to play a game on Sunday. They say prior to the game, they did contact tracing and symptom checks, and an unspecified number of players were quarantined. But despite that, by Monday, how many folks had coronavirus? 14 on the team, I believe. So again, why play that game at all? And to be fair, I don't quite understand the whole industry of sports. I don't really watch it, but for someone that is not a major fan of sports, coming into this and watching an interview like this, what's more important, the health and safety of folks involved, or being able to watch and participate in sports? You know? This is not an essential service. This does not need, like Disney World. I'm sorry. And again, folks need a paycheck, folks need a salary, but when you are just going into a new wave of coronavirus, and we see that, you know, the states aren't doing too well in terms of our spikes, and we have non-essential businesses and organizations that are reopening these wounds and potentially harming hundreds, if not thousands of people by exposing them to coronavirus. At what point do you say, you know, we can go a season without the MLB? And I don't know the specifics of it, but I know at the beginning there were some players, like at the very beginning for certain sports, who were donating parts of their salaries to the vendors who were losing their source of income. So could there potentially be a workaround where we're not endangering whole teams and then their families and then the people that their families come into contact with? They also make a point to state that the CDC guidelines are about being in close contact with one another, meaning don't come into close contact with one another. And so they, in the interview, kind of state a workaround where they say just being a teammate of a player does not put you at risk. Being in close contact puts you at risk. But if you're a teammate of a player, aren't you in close contact with those people that you are playing the game with? They're all in the dugout together. You can't play a sport like this, even if you do say that baseball is a socially distant sport. Obviously, especially in the absence of a bubble like we've seen other sports have, you're not a contactless sport. And case in point, the Marlins. They've missed 2 games now because I believe 14 players have the coronavirus. So being a teammate doesn't mean that you're going to get it just by virtue of being a teammate, but when you're a part of a team, you're in close contact with each other. You can't differentiate that. They also go on to state that each team has at least one person available to do contact tracing. By that, they mean that they have someone who they have quote unquote trained. They don't really specify how that person was trained or what the qualifications are. But they say that they have someone who is trained in contact tracing so that if someone does contract COVID, they're able to then trace who that person's been in contact with, who that person then contacted, so on and so forth. But again, in the absence of a bubble, like you've seen in other sports, when you have contact tracing, how do you know who they have been in contact with? How do you know outside of the sport when they're on that plane, when they're in that airport, when they're in the hotel, when they're going out to dinner, when they're with their family? There are so many variables to this that they can't properly monitor who they've been in contact with before they then come in contact with their team members. So, and again, contact tracing seems good in theory, but when you have one person with coronavirus on Friday, 3 by Saturday, an unspecified number of players quarantined by Sunday, and a total of 14 players with coronavirus, how effective is the contact tracing? So we want to prevent cases, not figure out where the cases occurred after they've happened. How effective is this in keeping players safe when you're just looking back at the statistics and saying, oh, well, this is patient 0 in the team, and this is how the other players got it. No, you want the players to not have had it at all. So I don't particularly understand, and shout out in the comments if you can elaborate how this is effective or why teams are relying so much on contact tracing when it seems to be a little bit after the fact, meaning players already have COVID, what we were trying to avoid in the first place. And then he says that they have theories as to what might have happened, but nothing definitive. So again, contact tracing, you can't even specify where it came from. You have theories, but you don't know how it's happened. So why are we relying on contact tracing to help keep players safe when you have admitted that you can't even trace where this Marlins case outbreak started from? It's not an effective use of time, in my opinion. And I'm sure their resources could be put to better use trying to figure out how to prevent cases in the team rather than figuring out unsuccessfully where the cases occurred to begin with. And then Manfred calls this not a nightmare, which what would be a nightmare situation for him, for multiple teams to have to miss out on games because they have an outbreak within the team, you know. And then they go on to say, a team losing a number of players to make it non-competitive would be an issue, going back to what would be a nightmare scenario. So he says that we're not quite there yet, but a potentially bad situation would be if there were a number of players that were knocked out of the loop because of COVID, that the team would be rendered unable to play. Well, isn't that what just happened with the Marlins? They've missed 2 games because a number of their players came down with COVID, and they were unable to travel to their other games because there was a major outbreak of COVID. So if the worst case scenario is a team losing a number of players to COVID, so many players, in fact, that they can't play, isn't that what just happened with the Marlins? So all this to say, it goes back to one of the shows we had previously, which is just wear your mask, just do the right thing. Perhaps in this day and age, we go a season without sports, without the MLB. And it's not as cut and dry as that. Again, going back to, there are people that do rely on the MLB for their livelihood, and under no circumstances should that be taken lightly. But at what point do we say, perhaps we try to help the people whose livelihoods have been lost while also maintaining that we might need to not play this sport this year? Do the players really need that salary? Would there have been a better alternative? And Some may say that it was worth a shot. Well, they've given it a shot, and the Marlins have been knocked for a loop. So at what point now do we say, it was a good experiment, but we don't really need sports right now. It's not an essential service. I'm sorry. If theaters are still closed, I have a number of friends in the theater industry who are taking a major hit because they cannot work, and theaters are not expected to be open again until 2021. So if we see other industries like the theater industry being closed because of the risk of COVID and close contact with one another, why is this not being applied to Major League Sports as well? So shout out in the comments if you have any thoughts on this, if you disagree with me, or if there's something I've missed in this equation. I would love to hear from you. I want to know a little bit more about how not just the MLB, but Major League Sports in general operate, and how, especially going into football season, the conversation shifts as they talk about the new football season and what that might look like. So feel free to shout out in the comments. And if you guys want to start a discussion, we will start next week's show with a little bit of a follow-up on this. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for tuning in. See us next week, Wednesday at 11 a.m. for the Spotlight. Have a great day.